My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a senior financial analyst with 12 years of experience working for one of the largest investment banks in New York. I've spent my entire career analyzing market trends, currency fluctuations, and economic indicators. I thought I understood how money worked. I was comfortable in my world of spreadsheets, algorithms, and predictable patterns. But 6 months ago, something happened that made me question everything I believed about the foundation of our entire economic system. It started with what seemed like a routine assignment. My supervisor asked me to investigate unusual trading patterns in several emerging market currencies that had been showing synchronized volatility despite having completely different economic fundamentals. Countries with strong GDP growth were seeing their currencies weaken at the exact same time as nations with struggling economies. It made no sense from a traditional economic perspective. I spent weeks diving deep into the data, working 16-hour days, cross-referencing trade volumes, timing patterns, and geographic distributions. I created complex algorithms to track microtransactions across 47 different currency pairs, looking for patterns that traditional analysis might miss. What I initially thought would be a simple 2-week project turned into an obsession that consumed my entire life. The breakthrough came on a Friday night when I was alone in the office, surviving on my 4th cup of coffee and pure determination. I had been running correlation analyses on trading data from the past 3 years, when suddenly my algorithm flagged something that made my hands literally tremble as I stared at my computer screen. The currency movements weren't random or based on economic fundamentals. They were coordinated with mathematical precision. Every single major currency fluctuation over the past 18 months had been preceded by identical trading patterns originating from a network of accounts that, on the surface, appeared completely unrelated. But when I mapped the transaction flows, I discovered they were all executing trades at exactly the same microsecond intervals, using identical algorithmic signatures that suggested they were controlled by a single master system. But here's what made my blood run cold. When I traced these accounts deeper, using advanced blockchain analysis tools that most analysts don't have access to, I discovered they were all connected to a single algorithmic trading system called Project Confidence. The system wasn't just predicting currency movements, it was creating them through coordinated psychological warfare. And it wasn't targeting currencies based on their economic strength or weakness. It was targeting them based on something the internal documents called belief coefficients, mathematical models that quantified public trust in different monetary systems. I found spreadsheets containing detailed psychological profiles of entire populations. German citizens, they noted, responded to inflation fears within 6 hours of targeted messaging. Japanese investors showed predictable panic patterns when presented with specific types of economic uncertainty. American consumers could be triggered into currency conversion behaviors through carefully timed social media campaigns that most people would never recognize as manipulation. The system had been collecting data on how different cultures, age groups, and economic classes respond to financial anxiety. They knew exactly which psychological buttons to push to make people lose faith in their money, and they had turned this knowledge into a precision instrument for economic control. Have you ever wondered why some currencies suddenly lose value even when the country's economy is performing well? Or why market crashes seem to happen just when people start feeling too confident about their financial security? I found a classified internal memo dated March 15th, 2024, that explained everything in terrifying detail. The memo outlined what they called the Faith Protocol, a systematic approach to manipulating public confidence in different currencies by creating coordinated sell-offs that trigger panic responses. The document contained detailed psychological profiles of how different populations react to financial uncertainty, with specific triggers designed to maximize fear and confusion. But what made me physically sick was a subsection titled Generational Targeting Strategies. They had identified that millennials respond most strongly to cryptocurrency-related fear campaigns, while baby boomers could be manipulated through traditional banking security concerns. Generation X showed the highest susceptibility to retirement security anxiety, which could be triggered through strategic news cycles about pension fund instability. The document included actual case studies. They had successfully crashed the Argentine peso in 2022 not through economic pressure, but by strategically spreading rumors about government financial mismanagement through carefully chosen social media influencers. The rumors were completely fabricated, but they created enough uncertainty to trigger real economic consequences that justified the artificial panic they had created. Most disturbing was their success metrics section. They measured effectiveness not in financial terms, but in what they called belief degradation rates, how quickly they could destroy public confidence in monetary systems. Their goal wasn't profit from trading, although that was a significant side benefit. Their goal was testing how completely they could control economic reality through psychological manipulation alone. But the most disturbing discovery was a section titled The Belief Infrastructure. According to these documents, our entire monetary system has been restructured around what they call engineered trust. Since the abandonment of the gold standard, currency value isn't determined by economic fundamentals or even supply and demand. It's determined by carefully managed public perception campaigns that create artificial confidence or destroy it on command. They had developed what they called trust architecture, a sophisticated network of financial media outlets, social media influencers, academic economists, and even government officials who unknowingly spread messages designed to shape public perception of currency stability. Most of these people had no idea they were part of a coordinated system. They genuinely believed they were providing independent analysis, while actually repeating talking points that had been carefully crafted to produce specific psychological responses in the general population. The documents revealed a chilling level of infiltration into what we consider legitimate financial institutions. Major credit rating agencies, respected economic research firms, even university economics departments were receiving funding tied to promoting specific narratives about currency stability. The funding was structured through such complex networks of foundations and research grants that the recipients never realized their independent research was actually serving a coordinated agenda. I spent an entire weekend mapping out the connections between the organizations mentioned in these documents and public statements made by financial experts over the past 5 years. The correlations were undeniable. Every major shift in public opinion about currency stability could be traced back to coordinated messaging campaigns that had originated from this network. What do you think about the idea that your money's value isn't based on anything tangible, but on collective psychology that can be manipulated by people you've never heard of? The documents revealed that Project Confidence has been operational since 2008, running parallel experiments on currency stability across 43 different countries. They've been systematically testing which psychological triggers most effectively create or destroy faith in monetary systems. The results were terrifying in their precision. For example, the memo detailed how they had successfully crashed the Turkish lira in 2023, not through economic pressure, but by strategically releasing conflicting information about inflation rates across different media channels. The confusion alone was enough to trigger mass currency conversion that created a real economic crisis from an artificial psychological one. But they had also run positive experiments. In 2022, they had artificially strengthened the Swiss franc by coordinating positive messaging about Switzerland's financial stability across multiple platforms simultaneously. They proved they could create economic confidence just as easily as they could destroy it, treating entire national economies like laboratory experiments. I discovered they maintained detailed databases on what they called economic personality profiles for major population centers. They knew that New Yorkers responded differently to financial anxiety than people in rural Texas. They understood that European confidence in the euro could be shaken through different psychological approaches than those needed to destabilize Asian currencies. Most shocking was their predictive modeling. They had successfully forecasted and then created 12 major currency fluctuations over the past 4 years, not by analyzing economic fundamentals, but by understanding the psychological vulnerabilities of different populations and then exploiting those vulnerabilities with surgical precision. I started cross-referencing these internal experiments with real-world events, spending my evenings and weekends building comprehensive timelines that connected their psychological operations to actual market movements. The correlations were undeniable and absolutely terrifying. The Brexit currency volatility, the cryptocurrency crashes of 2022, even the recent fluctuations in the US dollar strength. All of them showed the exact same preliminary trading patterns described in the Project Confidence playbook. But here's what truly terrified me. I found evidence that they weren't just manipulating individual currencies. They were testing what they called cascade collapse scenarios, deliberately triggering belief failures in smaller economies to study how quickly that loss of faith could spread to larger monetary systems. They were essentially running controlled experiments on global financial stability using real countries and real people as test subjects. I found detailed reports on their contagion studies. They had deliberately destabilized the Lebanese pound in 2021 to observe how that crisis would affect confidence in other Middle Eastern currencies. They monitored social media sentiment, tracked capital flight patterns, and measured what they called psychological spillover effects as people in neighboring countries began questioning their own monetary systems. The research was conducted with the same methodological rigor you'd expect from a university psychology department, except instead of studying individual behavior, they were studying how to manipulate the economic beliefs of entire civilizations. They had turned currency manipulation into a precise science, with reproducible results and predictable outcomes. The most chilling document I discovered was titled Operation Foundational Reset. It outlined a theoretical scenario where they could systematically destroy confidence in the US dollar over a period of 18 months, not through economic warfare or political pressure, but through precisely timed releases of information designed to make people question the fundamental concept of fiat currency itself. The operation was structured in phases. Phase 1 involved coordinated social media campaigns, questioning the historical stability of paper currency. Phase 2 introduced carefully crafted academic papers, suggesting alternative monetary systems. Phase 3 would involve strategic market manipulations, designed to create visible inconsistencies between dollar strength and underlying economic indicators. The final phase called for what they termed revelation events, carefully orchestrated leaks of information that would make people realize their currency had no tangible backing. What made this even more terrifying was that they had already conducted smaller-scale versions of this operation on regional currencies. The documentation showed they had successfully tested each phase of the protocol on the Canadian dollar in 2023, creating measurable decreases in public confidence without causing economic catastrophe. It was a proof of concept for much larger operations. I realized that Operation Foundational Reset wasn't just theoretical. They were actively testing its components in real time, using current events as cover for their psychological experiments. Every major financial news story, every expert analysis, every social media trend about monetary policy, I started seeing it all as potential elements of their systematic belief manipulation campaigns. Do you remember how, in early 2024, there was a sudden surge of social media discussions about the worthlessness of paper money? How multiple influencers and financial commentators all started talking about the same themes around the same time. After reading these documents, I realized that wasn't organic discussion. It was a beta test for mass psychological manipulation. I began documenting everything I found, creating my own encrypted files with screenshots and analysis. But as I dug deeper, I started noticing changes in my work environment. My access to certain databases was suddenly, temporarily restricted for system maintenance. Colleagues who had collaborated with me for years became mysteriously busy when I tried to discuss my findings. Have you ever had the experience of feeling like invisible forces are subtly reshaping your professional reality? It's not dramatic enough to call harassment, but it's consistent enough that you know it's intentional. 3 weeks after I started my investigation, I received what appeared to be a routine job offer from a prestigious financial consulting firm in Switzerland. The offer was extraordinarily generous, nearly triple my current salary to work on traditional currency analysis projects with full academic freedom and minimal oversight. When I asked for specifics about their research methodology, the responses were vague in ways that made every instinct I developed in 12 years of financial analysis scream warnings. I realized they weren't trying to silence me dramatically. They were trying to redirect me into a comfortable, well-paid position where I'd be focused on conventional analysis that wouldn't threaten their operations. It was almost elegant in its subtlety. Instead of creating a scandal by suppressing my research, they were making it more attractive for me to voluntarily shift my attention elsewhere. But here's what's really disturbing. The more I studied their techniques, the more I realized that Project Confidence isn't just about manipulating currencies. It's about proving that our entire economic system is fundamentally based on collective delusion that can be controlled by anyone with sufficient resources and psychological sophistication. They've demonstrated that money, the thing we spend our entire lives working for, saving, and worrying about, has no inherent value beyond our shared agreement to believe in it. And they've proven that this shared belief can be engineered, manipulated, and destroyed with the same precision we use to adjust interest rates or calculate inflation. The question that keeps me awake at night is this: if a relatively small organization can systematically manipulate global currency values through psychological operations, what other fundamental assumptions about our economic reality are actually just carefully maintained illusions? I've started paying attention to financial news differently now. When major economic announcements are made simultaneously across multiple countries, when market analysts all seem to reach similar conclusions about seemingly unrelated events, when public confidence in financial institutions shifts in ways that don't correlate with actual performance data, I find myself wondering who might be orchestrating these patterns. What disturbs me most is how effective their approach is. They're not fighting the system or trying to replace it. They're simply demonstrating that they understand how it really works, and they're using that understanding to their advantage. The rest of us continue believing that currency values are determined by economic fundamentals, while they profit from our ignorance about the psychological mechanisms that actually drive those values. Do you think there's a meaningful difference between a currency system backed by gold and one backed by carefully managed collective belief? Because after seeing these documents, I'm honestly not sure there is. I'm still working as a financial analyst, though my research focus has indeed shifted toward what my supervisor calls more traditional market analysis. The Switzerland job offer was followed by several other attractive opportunities, all of which would have moved me away from the specific type of investigation that led to my discoveries. I've learned to be more careful about which databases I access and which colleagues I trust with sensitive questions. But I've also started noticing things I never saw before, patterns in market behavior that suggest the psychological manipulation techniques I discovered aren't limited to currency markets. The stock market volatility of late 2023, the synchronized cryptocurrency price movements, even the timing of major corporate earnings announcements, all of it shows signs of the same coordinated psychological pressure techniques outlined in the Project Confidence documents. If you work in finance, or if you've ever wondered why your retirement savings seem to fluctuate in ways that don't match the economic news you're reading, I'd be genuinely interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Because after what I discovered, I'm convinced that most of what we think we know about how money works is actually just the surface layer of a much more sophisticated system of belief management. The scariest part isn't that our currency is backed by belief instead of gold. The scariest part is that someone has figured out how to manufacture and destroy that belief on demand, and most of us have no idea it's happening. We continue making financial decisions based on economic fundamentals, while they make decisions based on psychological manipulation techniques that can override those fundamentals whenever they choose. I don't know if Project Confidence is still operational, or if it's been replaced by something even more sophisticated. What I do know is that the documents I found proved something that should terrify anyone who has ever worried about their financial security. The value of your money isn't determined by economic reality. It's determined by how successfully someone else can convince you to believe in or doubt that value. And the people who understand this aren't central bank governors or elected officials. They're psychological operations specialists who treat global financial markets like massive behavioral experiments, with all of us as unwitting test subjects in their research on how to control economic reality through manufactured belief. Have you ever noticed how financial crises seem to happen just when people start feeling too secure about their economic situation? After reading these documents, I don't think that timing is coincidental anymore. I think it's precisely engineered to maintain the psychological conditions necessary for their system to continue operating effectively. The next time you hear about unexpected currency fluctuations or market volatility, that doesn't seem to match the underlying economic data. Ask yourself, who benefits from this confusion? Who profits when people lose faith in their financial security? Because after what I've discovered, I'm convinced that the answer to those questions reveals the real power structure behind our entire monetary system.